You're watching TelecomTV from the MEF16 event in Baltimore. And I'm joined now by Marc Halbfinger, who is CEO of PCCW Global. Marc, delighted to meet you, and thank you for joining us on
Thanks very much,
TV.
Good morning.
PCCW Global, we've been following for quite some time. It's a very innovative company. What you do is since we're at the forefront of this industry, you're implementing a lot of these transformational elements that we talk about. SDNNFA, the orchestration. How are you managing to do that in your network? Because you do seem really ahead of the curve here.
Don't know if we're ahead of the curve. I think there's an enormous amount of development that's happening, and just taking part here in Gen 16, which is sponsored by MEF, you can see that all companies really in our space are moving very aggressively. And I think it's part and parcel due to customer demand. Our approach actually started because we're perhaps a little bit little compared to some of the big players, and we started implementing SDN about 5.5 years ago, in part due to HR challenges, and we felt that software would be the way to go, and in fact demonstrated it has. Virtualization on top of that SDN environment obviously brings more products, more services, greater flexibility to end users. And we've been involved in MEF, even at the board level, in helping shape some of the guidelines associated with what's called lifecycle orchestration, or LSO. In part because we're small, we've chosen to take our network capabilities and see how we could interconnect with other carriers who are like-minded. And that is perhaps some of the innovative approach that we've taken.
It's easy for us at times to talk about the technology, but the impact of that technology on a business. We talk about transformation. It does seem transforming not just working practices, but also, I guess, internal organization as well.
Absolutely, and PCCW Global has, in MEF and outside on the street with other service providers, been an advocate of creating commercial interfaces for the new technology approaches. Once upon a time, we had standard interconnects for voice, for wholesale international voice, and then IS-41 for roaming, which was a technical standard which drove commercial behavior, and we saw activity around that for X25, and even MPLS and NIs created some simple approaches to commercial environments. But now we're headed to a bandwidth on-demand dynamic environment where the commercial parameters are no longer two-dimensional. They're three-dimensional and perhaps even more. We have to be able to create wholesale infrastructures for commercial settlement between carriers, for bandwidth variations by destinations, by applications, by services. We'll be looking at flows, network flows. We'll be looking at various other activities in order to see what are the new units of currency that transpire wholesale between and among networks in order to serve end users.
I mean, you talk about between networks there. I guess it's one thing for one provider to do this, but you really need the whole industry to do this. And then how do we interface between the operators?
That's the challenge that's also being discussed here in the various workshops at MEF, and things that there are clear working groups that have been set up in order to do. And it's one of the challenges that I think that the industry recognizes. Some other service providers have already announced the technical side of interoperability, which we've practiced and tested for a couple of years already, but it now comes down to what are the commercial arrangements among carriers. In most of the cloud-based environments that we see today for applications, you will see singular ecosystems. In fact, the connections from physical networks to cloud, the commercial approach between the networks are usually segregated silos. That is, a customer will transact both with the cloud ecosystem and with the physical network ecosystem. But it's time, I think, first and foremost, that physical networks assure that on-demand software-based infrastructure can be transacted on a wholesale basis in order to give customers the breadth of every global network that may exist. And secondly, that the physical ecosystems also learn how to sensibly interconnect commercially with the cloud players to give the customer a singular experience. Whether or not that will happen, I don't know, but that's certainly our aspiration at PCCW Global.
I mean, you mentioned that the MEF forum is working actively on this at the moment. Are we optimistic that in a short space of time we can address this, we can accomplish what we need to do here?
I think that many of the organizations at MEF, we've been speaking about this for a couple of years from the PCCW Global perch, but I think that the recognition in MEF and in other institutions, not just MEF, but other environments that are involved in setting standards are starting to get a handle of that. And I think that the MEF Unite program, which seeks to work with other institutions that are also involved in not just setting technical standards, but more accurately perhaps creating frameworks for doing business in this new on-demand type of age, hopefully will get us there. We do need some sort of structured framework that would make sense for everyone, both from a technical operations perspective as well as for commercial, we used to call it settlement arrangements, if you will. If we're able to create wholesale commercial settlements, it will open up network infrastructure to end users far more aggressively, and will incent perhaps the advent of greater applications that can be developed over common networks.
And will we also see new business models and new innovative models that perhaps have been impossible with the networks of before?
I would hope so. Certainly physical networks are being pushed. From a P&L financial point of view, it would seem that the cloud providers are driving applications and feature sets that are sitting in the cloud space, but still physical networks need to be built, invested in, and a return needs to be found for that. And I think that physical networks need to understand that customers want to take decisions differently. We need to address ourselves to that, and hopefully then the return can be found both at the retail side, but also now at the wholesale side.
Looking at the work that MEF does, you want, I believe, one of the first operators to be Carrier Ethernet 2.0 certified. The whole certification process, how important is that to a provider?
I think we were one of the first 2.0 certified, and then earlier this year we were also the first to be 100 gig 2.0 certified. And I think that we made our name, we created a little bit of a challenge for MEF, because originally it was called Metro Ethernet Forum, and we went out for certification on a global network, and I'm not sure what they wanted to do with the M in MEF. But in any event, we felt that the certification program is quite critical, because it creates a uniform basis for that physical interconnection I was talking about before. On the one hand, if you want to do a commercial interaction, but you don't have some sort of common baseline for that interconnect, how else will you be able to function? And at least here there's a third-party view, a little bit of an independent, neutral perspective on what is common platforms that can be interconnected, and a baseline that allows network-based service providers to interact with software vendors, hardware vendors, and so on. I think it's quite a sensible approach. We therefore promote inside our organization an aggressive approach to assure that our colleagues, engineering, operations, pre-sales, are all involved in the certification process.
Just how important is it for an operator of your size to work within the MEF forum and get involved and actually influence the shape we're taking?
Well, our data business is growing quite aggressively year on year with networks in Asia, Africa, Middle East, the Americas, a lot of different locations worldwide, and yet still our business is not as large perhaps as the significant major country metros that you'd find in China or the United States, or even in Europe and the Middle East. And so therefore the interaction that we have in MEF with other technical and product components in various companies allows us to get feedback from the progress that they're making. In turn, we're able to contribute some of our views, and I think that the interaction, and to have a common forum for that interaction, is quite valuable. The value that PCCW Global has been able to bring to both its wholesale and its retail enterprise customers has been globality. That seeds first from its own network, but also from the interconnected relationships with other service providers, whether physical carriers or cloud-based applications. And so being in this environment for us is very helpful.
Marc, appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Have a great day.